Every year on our birthday, we want to take time to celebrate and reflect on what God has done at Collective over the past year. And so that's how I want to kick things off this morning. You cool with that? You guys were really rowdy for CT, so I expect you to be really rowdy for me. You cool with that? Okay. I will say this. I told first service that if they weren't loud, they weren't going to be my favorite, and I'm doubling down on that for you all as well. You've had more sleep, probably more coffee. All right, so let's start by celebrating the fact that we are launching a third service today, which is just incredible. So after Christmas, we expanded this room because we were running out of space. We wanted to add more seats, create more opportunities for people to bump into Jesus. And when we did that, we thought the expansion would give us about 18 months before we ran out of seats again. But you all have done such an incredible job showing up and inviting people that we only made it to 9 months. Yeah, it's a good thing. Now, here's the thing. Some of you have asked me, well, what comes next? I'm not telling you, and I'm not going to tell you how long I think it's going to take because you're going to cut that time in half, and we're just not ready for it yet. But if we keep growing, a fourth service is coming. Okay. Here are a few more things to celebrate over the past 12 months. 103 people have joined the team and started serving with us on Sunday mornings, which is just wonderful. You all have donated more than 35,000 pounds of food, 10,000 hygiene items, and 750 toys to local organizations in the past 12 months. All right, I'm going to run through these quickly, so no need to clap at all of them. We have seen a record number of middle schoolers and high schoolers at Youth Collective on Wednesday nights. We started season 2 of our podcast called Your Story Matters. We had a tattoo artist come and do tattoos in the lobby. If you're new, that's a story for another time. We don't have time for that today. Over 125 people started this year by completing the 35-day challenge, a challenge where every day for 35 days without missing, people read their Bible, they engaged in 15 minutes of physical activity, they served others, they prayed, and they removed something from their lives that was holding them back. But the biggest thing that we get to celebrate this morning is over the past 12 months, we've seen 49 people proclaim their faith in Jesus and get baptized, which is absolutely incredible. And to make it even better, we just celebrated 3 baptisms at first service. We got 1 more during second and 2 more at third because we're just going to keep going. There are so many amazing things from the past year and really the past 7 years at this church. And the coolest thing we have set up today to celebrate is out by the food truck, we have a collective timeline. And what I want you to do is I want you to grab your cupcake, and while you're enjoying that, I want you to take a few moments to mark your journey with Collective on that timeline. It doesn't matter if you've been here since the very beginning or this is your first Sunday. We want to see that. And so we have stickers that represent the first time you came to Collective, when you got your second time guest shirt, if you've taken the next step, if you've been baptized here, joined the team here, joined a group here, if you've invited other people to be a part of this as well. And what we want you to do is we want you to put your stickers on the timeline when those moments took place, because there's something really inspiring about seeing what God has done in the individual lives of people in this church. You know, we get to celebrate the big stuff together, but there are so many little things that have been happening over the past 7 years. And so it'll take you just a few minutes to do it, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. Grab that cupcake, put those stickers on there. All right, to kick things off, let's play a word association game. I'm going to say a word, and I want you to say whatever comes to your mind. You guys ready for that? All right, first one, Baltimore Ravens. Okay. First service, it was just all yes, okay? So I'm more in line with second service. All right, second word, fall. Yeah. You're just cheering. Say words. The correct, it's pumpkin spice lattes. That is the correct one. All right, third word. Ready? Politics. I'm just kidding. Don't you dare. Nope. No politics. Ushers, if anybody says anything about politics, you take them out of this place. All right, one more. And I don't want you to shout this one out. I just want you to think about this one. What do you think of when you hear the word church? And I know for some of you, right, if you are being honest, the words running through your mind right now are not good ones. They are words like judgmental and fake and irrelevant and painful and boring. But what's interesting is when we read the Bible, when we read the biographies of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that's not at all what Jesus was like. And if you keep reading into the book of Acts, which is the story about how the church itself started, that's not at all what the early church was defined by. The early church was defined by things like community and vulnerability and growth. The early church was both safe and dangerous. It was safe for the broken, but it was dangerous because it was on a powerful mission. And if we are being honest with ourselves, most of us would say it feels like something might have been lost along the way when it comes to the church. That the church has become something it was never designed to be. On June 6, 1944, it was D-Day. The 101st Airborne, known as the Tip of the Spear, was dropped into northern France to begin their fight against Hitler and the Nazis. Two of those soldiers were medics named Robert Wright and Kenneth Moore. And as medics, they were trained not to shoot and kill people, but to help those who had been wounded in battle. And as the 101st Airborne made their way through the dead of night to their drop zone, enemy fire forced them to jump out of their planes early, miles away from their designated spot, and they landed in a place called Engleville, France, at 3 a.m. Initially, everything was calm, but then fighting broke out, and as Robert and Kenneth began treating the wounded, they realized that they needed to set up a medical headquarters. And that's when Robert found an old church in Engleville. He went inside to make sure it was safe and found that it was lined with wooden pews, and they were about the size of a person, so they would be perfect for caring for the wounded. As the battle waged on, the two medics took turns working on patients and going out to find more, and by 10:30 a.m. on D-Day, the church was packed. The stained glass had been shot out. A missile had actually fallen through the roof, but thankfully it was a dud, and so they kept tending to the injured men. At one point, a German soldier burst through the doors with a machine gun, but when he realized that they were medics and they were treating wounded soldiers from both sides with no regard of nationality or uniform, he lowered his weapon and he left. After about 36 hours, the fighting had ceased in Engleville and the soldiers moved on. But before they did, Robert Wright and Kenneth Moore treated over 80 soldiers. Many of them were German. After the war, both men received a Silver Star for their heroic efforts. And if you go to Engleville, France today, remarkably, that church is still standing. But here's what happened. As Wright and Moore were treating soldiers on the pews, blood soaked into the wooden seats. And after the war was over and the soldiers were gone and peace was restored, the people of that town, more importantly, the people of that church, didn't replace the pews. They didn't sand them down. They didn't paint over them. They left them. They said this church was built 900 years ago to be a place of hope and healing for the broken and hurting. And on D-Day, that's exactly what it was. And so they preserved the bloodstained pews as a memorial of everything that happened on that fateful day. And when hearing this story, here's what I wonder. I wonder if the image of the bloodstained pews is exactly what is possible when the church gets it right. When the church becomes a hospital for the wounded. When people in the church decide to be real about the ways in which they are bleeding. When the church remembers that it is both safe and dangerous, safe for the broken and dangerous because it's on a powerful mission. And that's why we're starting this series today. Bloodstained Pews is about how vulnerability transforms a broken church into a church for the broken. And I want to share a few things to set up this series. The first is that this series is based off of a book and a sermon series that was written by my friend and mentor, Carl Kuhl. When he was writing it, I was lucky enough to play a small part in the creation and planning of Bloodstained Pews. And I've been holding on to this for a few years, and I'm excited to bring it forward to you all over the next 6 weeks. Now, this Sunday, we're actually giving away some copies of the book. We have 25 copies at Next Steps at each service. And so if you want a copy, get there quickly and grab it first. And if you're trying to lean more into this series, one thing we'll say is the book and the series are different. Right? We're not preaching the book or anything like that, but that book will help guide your way through this series if you're interested. The second is that this series is PG-12. This means if you have children in here who are birth through 5th grade, I encourage you to check them into Collective Kids. Collective Kids is an incredible environment that is specially designed for them. Our kids team has even created lessons that parallel the adult themes in this series. They're just suitable for their age. And just as a reminder, I never filter what I say in this room because elementary age kids might be in here, because this space is not designed for them. But that is especially true in this series. So if you have kids in here and you don't want to have uncomfortable conversations with them later, now is a great time to bring them back to Collective Kids. And the third thing is this. This series has two main components. The first is the Sunday morning worship experience, and the second are our small groups. And if you engage in either one of those, you will grow. Right? And when I say engage, I actually mean participate. Lean in. It's more than just showing up. But if you really want the most out of this series, you have to engage in both. And so I want to challenge you to make being here a priority. If you have to miss a Sunday, catch up on Spotify or YouTube, but make it a priority to be here and to lean in. And the second is I want to challenge you to join a small group. The easiest way to do that is through the Church Center app. You open up the app, there's a groups button down at the bottom. Click on that. Or, like CT said, you can head to Next Steps after service. We have 11 groups that will meet through this fall, and that includes groups that meet late at night, a Sunday morning brunch group. We have a group that's just for young adults. And we even have a group that will meet here on Tuesday nights that won't meet through the whole fall. It will only meet through the 6 weeks of this series. But we're going to engage this series even more in our small groups, and so we encourage you to be a part of one. Right? And so be here and join a small group if you want the most out of this series. We want to be a church of bloodstained pews. If you are hurting, if you are alone, if you are empty, we want this place to be where you bleed and where you heal. Where it doesn't matter what you've been through, it doesn't matter what you're doing, it doesn't matter what mistakes you have made, you can find grace, you can find a place to belong, you can find a place where you can be real about your brokenness and how Jesus is working in your life. But in order for Collective to be that type of church, we have to be real. We have to be vulnerable. And so every week we're going to talk about getting real in an area of life where we might be walled up. Because I think deep down inside, we all want real things in our lives. Think about it. If you had to choose between fake diamonds and real diamonds, which would you choose? Real. Unless you're single. You'll take anything if it's on a ring on your finger, okay? Some of the single ladies are like, I'll take fake, I don't care, I just want to be married. Right? Would you rather have fake plants or real plants? Would you rather have fake Jordans or real Jordans? We don't want fake news, fake friends, or fake people. We want real. We want real community. We want real healing. We want real faith. But in order for that to happen, we have to decide to be vulnerable. Really, we have to be willing to bleed. And I know that that's scary. I know that being vulnerable opens ourselves up to being wounded. I know that it's easier to just shove these things deep down into the shadows of our soul. I know that it's safer to share some, but not all. But when we choose to be real, that's when we experience freedom in Jesus. That's when we find peace in pain. That's when we start to heal. That's when we begin to let go of the baggage that we've been carrying our entire life. And that's when we find the community that we long for. And so in this series, we're going to work to break through fear and shame and guilt and insecurity so we can become the people in the church that God has called us to be. And we're going to start this morning by getting real when it comes to family. I think we can all agree that family is important. Over the past few years, the National Institute of Health has put out countless studies about the impact of family, and here's how they summed up what they found. They said family relationships play the central role in shaping our well-being throughout the course of our life, and the quality of our family relationships can influence things like our mental, emotional, and physical well-being for better or for worse. And we know this. We do not need the NIH to tell us this. Right, family is such an integral part of who we are, and we can't escape the need for and the impact of our family. But what that often means is that we have family wounds. We have family baggage. We have family pain that shapes who we are and how we live. And so the question is, what do we do? Now this morning, we're going to look at a story in the Old Testament about King David and his son Absalom. I'm just giving you a warning right now. This story is completely messed up. It's probably one of the most awful stories in the Bible, but it's something that we can learn from. And if you didn't listen to my "this is not for kids," you have been warned as we go through this story. Here's how this story starts. David has a son named Absalom and a daughter named Tamar. David also has a son named Amnon who has a different mom, and so he's the half-brother of Absalom and Tamar. And in this story, Amnon falls in love with his half-sister Tamar. And this is where the story gets dark. Amnon knows that his feelings toward Tamar aren't appropriate, but he becomes obsessed with her. Then he gets violent, and then he rapes her. And the narrative of this story concludes with this verse. 2 Samuel 13:15 says, "Then suddenly Amnon's love turned to hate, and he hated her even more than he had loved her." Right? Because rape is never about love. Abuse is never about love. And the story tells us that Tamar is understandably destroyed by this. Right? This is a life-ruining moment for her, and Scripture says that she tears her clothes and she put ashes on her head as a sign of mourning. In verse 20, it says, her brother Absalom saw her and asked, is it true that Amnon has been with you? Well, my sister, keep quiet for now, since he's your brother. Don't you worry about it. Now, when he says don't worry about it, he doesn't mean this is not a big deal. Absalom is not that type of brother. He doesn't say we don't need to talk about this thing, let's sweep it under the rug. What Absalom means is you don't have to worry because I'm going to take care of this. And then what happens is Absalom takes his sister and he cares for him. But look at this in verse 21. It says, when King David heard what had happened, he was very angry. And that makes sense, right? David should be angry. But then check out the beginning of verse 23. It says 2 years later. Right? 2 years later. Here's what this means. David found out his daughter was raped by one of his children, and he was angry about what happened, but then for 2 years he didn't do anything about it. He didn't step in as a father. He didn't step in as the king. He didn't even step in as a follower of God. Right? And imagine what those 2 years felt like for Tamar, for Absalom, even for Amnon and David. Imagine the hatred that was brewing, the anger and the bitterness and the grief, all unchecked for 2 years. And I know this story is intense, but we can relate to this, can't we? Don't we understand what it's like to sit in tension with our family? Don't we understand what it's like for someone in our family to hurt us, and we spend years waiting for the apology, years waiting for them to own up to it, years waiting for them to show remorse and change? Right? And what happens when we don't deal with our family issues? Right? They magically go away, right? Just kind of disintegrate into the universe, never to be felt again. Wrong. The resentment grows, the unforgiveness grows, the sadness grows, the shame grows, and eventually things explode. And that's exactly what happens. For 2 years, David sits on his hands, he does nothing, and eventually Absalom hits the breaking point and he murders Amnon. When King David hears about this, it says this in 2 Samuel 13:37, it says, David mourned many days for his son Amnon. And while David mourned, Absalom ran away. It says he fled to his grandfather, and he stayed there for 3 years. Right? 3 more years pass, nothing changes. In verse 39, it says, King David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed to be reunited with his son Absalom. And what this means is that David had finally found peace and was over the initial grieving stage for everything that happened with his family. But again, in the story, David doesn't do anything. It says he longs to be reunited with Absalom, but he does nothing. He wants his son back, but he doesn't do anything to get him back. Eventually, Absalom returns home. They live in the same city, but even though they live in the same city, he doesn't see his father for another 4 years. That's 9 years since the initial issue. And so Absalom in that place starts to believe, my father doesn't love me. He's okay with his son raping my sister, and he clearly doesn't care about our family. And Absalom begins to spiral, and because of this, he decides that his father shouldn't be king anymore, and he starts a coup. He runs David out of town. He takes over the throne, and just to rub salt in the wound to show everyone that he's in charge now, Absalom takes every single woman that served under David, he takes them up to the palace roof, and he has sex with them just to prove that he's in charge now. And the end result of all of this is that a civil war breaks out. It's father against son, and during the war, Absalom is killed, and then David is reinstated as king. The story ends in 2 Samuel 18:33, and it says, the king was overcome with emotion. He went up to the room over the gateway and burst into tears, and as he went, he cried, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I had died instead of you, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. All right, let's take a deep breath. Like I said, that's a heavy story. Right, doesn't this make you feel better about your family? Some of you have a really jacked up family, and this just makes you feel better because you're not the only one. Right? I know that this story is intense, but like I said earlier, I think we can learn from this. And so here's the first thing I want you to write down this morning. The first myth that stops us from getting real when it comes to family is we believe our family is the only family that is messed up. Right? And just reading that and just saying that out loud, we know that that's not true, but for some reason we still feel this way. We feel like we're the only ones still dealing with the abandonment issues from our parents' divorce. We feel like we're the only one trying to heal from the verbal or emotional abuse that we experience. We feel like we're the only ones who have children who don't want anything to do with us. We feel like we're the only ones who have lost our way because we didn't have parents to lead us. Right? We know in our brains that we are not alone in our family wounds. But for some reason, we believe that we are. Right? We feel like we are alone. And even bigger than that, we feel like we're not allowed to talk about it. And so in the end, we do what David did. Right? We ignore it. We let years go by pretending everything is okay, or maybe we escape to a room by ourselves to weep and cry, but we never let anybody else see what's going on. But we have to look in the mirror to acknowledge my family is messed up, and I am not alone. Right? In this story, David refused to deal with the brokenness in his family. He thought maybe if I just ignore it, it would go away, but it never goes away. Almost without exception, the pain in your family impacts you more than any other pain that you feel. Here's what the Bible says about this. Deuteronomy 5:9 says, I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. Now, this isn't this idea of this curse being passed down. That's not what this is. But what we know about these verses is true, is that God is saying, here's the natural consequence for parents who live outside of what God wants for them, right? And they pass down that pain from child to child to child. And we know this is true. If your parents are alcoholics, you are more likely to be an alcoholic. If your parents divorce, you are 91% more likely to get divorced. Right? What God is saying here is that pain continues on through generations until something gets in the way and stops it. Proverbs 22:6 says, direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it. Right? Some of you are dealing with wounds right now because your parents didn't lead you well. They didn't love you well. They didn't show you how to handle conflict. They didn't create space for you to be vulnerable. And because of that, you are now on a path you never wanted to be on. Colossians 3:21 says, fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged. Right? Some of us are dealing with wounds from our fathers. And we all know how important it is to have a healthy present father. Right? We know the stats, 90% of runaway and homeless children are from fatherless homes. 75% of adolescents in substance abuse treatment facilities are from fatherless homes. 63% of youth suicides happen in fatherless homes. But the stats actually show that it's not just about fatherless homes. The same studies have found that having a non-present father is just as bad as having an absent father. And a lot of us grew up in that space and we're still dealing with that pain. Right? Our families are messed up, and they have messed us up. And that is true whether you had a dysfunctional family or not. And so we have to understand that we are not alone in our family pain. Now here's the second myth that stops us from getting real when it comes to family. We believe that someone else should deal with it. It's someone else's problem to solve. I think the reason David tried ignoring what was going on in his family is because the story right before this, David gets caught having an affair. When David finds out that the woman is pregnant, he has her husband murdered. And so I can just imagine in David's head, he's thinking, who am I to judge other people when I just did this terrible thing? And the thing is, we all have reasons for not dealing with our family pain. Right? We all have excuses for assuming that someone else will handle it. And here's what I mean. Right? David probably thought Absalom should initiate because he's the one who murdered Amnon. And Absalom probably thought David should initiate because he is my father. The adult thinks my mom should initiate because she's the one who abused me. The mom thinks my child should initiate because I don't want to bring up painful memories if she doesn't want to. Right? The husband thinks my wife should initiate fighting for this because she's the one who cheated. But the wife thinks my husband should initiate because he's not going to believe anything I say anyway. And the teenager thinks my dad should initiate because he's the adult in the family. But the dad thinks the teenager should initiate because they're the ones who were offended. My point is this. When it comes to family, everyone feels wronged. And so if there's ever going to be reconciliation, if there's ever going to be a healthy relationship, you have to initiate. And by you, I mean you. Right? And I get it. The other person messed up. Right? They manipulated, they cheated, they were the addict, they let you down, so they need to go first. I get it. But think about it like this. Aren't you glad that isn't how Jesus treats you? Right? Aren't you glad that Jesus didn't say, well, they should initiate? They're the ones who messed this up. They need to go first. Aren't you glad that Jesus didn't take the posture of, once they are sorry, then I will die on a cross for them? But instead, Jesus pursued you. He loved you and he forgave you. We have to deal with the brokenness brought on by our family. And we have to be real about that pain because our family relationships, whether we want them to or not, they matter, which means we have to fight for them. Right? They impact us for better and worse. So you have to face what's in front of you and actually deal with it.
As long as I can remember, my family has been involved in church, like there every Sunday, there every Wednesday. Going on Sundays, being a part of things was a big part of our family culture and a huge part of my life. And this was the example that my parents set. The youth group at my church was a huge part of growing my faith. And that is actually where I met my first husband. We were in youth group together, we did camp together. Cut to 2008, we've been dating for about 2 years, engaged for 6 months, and it's time to get married. I'm barely 20 years old. We were just wrapped up in this church culture of, you court and you check all the boxes. Soon you realize that checklist, that's not really enough to hold things together. 2 years into our marriage, we actually were heavily involved in planting a church. Anywhere there was a hole on Sundays, 2 of us were involved plugging that hole, volunteering our time. On the outside, it all looked great, but there were a number of mental health issues that ran in his family, and at the age that we entered into this partnership, neither of us had good tools for communicating. In his mind, our careers were a competition with each other, and any success of mine was a reminder to him of how he was struggling or in his mind failing at what he wanted to do. He would tell the people in our circles, tell the people in our lives that I was just putting on a show to look good at church. I was going on this mission trip because I wanted the celebration and I wanted the recognition. It was rough. It built up over the years. This negativity, the competition, the neglect. In church community, you don't always feel like you can be vulnerable about those things. You don't feel like you can share when things are going wrong. Everyone silently agrees that you don't share your crap. I didn't realize how much damage had been done until someone else appeared in my circle that was encouraging and positive and made me feel valued and made me feel beautiful, and it was so easy to just slip into a relationship with him instead. The signs were there, and my husband, he asked me one day, "Hey, who is this guy?" And I was tired. I just was like, you know what? I'm just gonna tell him the truth. I'm gonna tell him everything. I had an affair with him. He said, get out, I need you to leave. And so I said, okay, and I packed my stuff in my car. After the divorce, I met someone new, started dating him. Of course, he wasn't on the same page that I was with Jesus, but at that point in time, I wasn't on my page with Jesus either. I just completely walked away from it. I'm really feeling that foundation that I had built in my childhood with my family, at the church I grew up in, and at the church we planted that had just recently hurt me. I couldn't get rid of any of that, and I knew that I needed to go back. I needed to find a church somewhere. I needed to break up with this guy that I was dating because he was not going to be on the same page with me as I started to dig back into my faith again. Cue March of 2017, Easter Sunday at Collective. The progress from that Easter Sunday was very rapid. By May, I was plugged into one of our small groups. I walked into that small group that night and decided that I was going to be vulnerable about my struggle. Instead of hiding the problem, which completely isolated me in my first marriage at that first church, I shared that I was in a living situation I shouldn't be in. I knew things needed to look different. And I was willing to be homeless rather than stay in that situation. In my experience, you're never the only one. And it's so freeing, especially if you've got that one thing that you've been holding on to. The minute that you share that with someone, the minute you get that off your shoulders, the freedom's real. The recovery that I had from all the hurt started by being vulnerable in a room of people that I barely knew and trusting them to be there for me because that's what the church is supposed to do.
Can we thank Katie for her vulnerability and sharing? So I do want to say this is just a small part of her story. This isn't all her story. This doesn't define Katie, especially for those of you who know her. But if there is something about what she shared that resonates with you specifically, I would encourage you to check out the podcast that we have called Your Story Matters, because Katie shared in length the beginning, the middle, and the end, and even where it is now on that podcast. And so if you want to check out a little bit more of that, you can. I'm going to finish up this morning. I'm going to read a children's book. This book is called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. Billy Bixby was rather surprised when he woke up one morning and found a dragon in his room. It was a small dragon, about the size of a kitten. The dragon wagged its tail happily when Billy patted its head. Billy went downstairs to tell his mother. There's no such thing as a dragon, said Billy's mother. And she said it like she meant it. Billy went back to his room and began to dress. The dragon came close to Billy and wagged its tail. But Billy didn't pat it. If there's no such thing as something, it's silly to pat it on its head. Billy washed his face and hands and went down to breakfast. The dragon went along. It was bigger now, almost the size of a dog. Billy sat down at the table. The dragon sat down on the table. This sort of thing was not usually permitted, but there wasn't much Billy's mother could do about it. She had already said there was no such thing as a dragon, and if there's no such thing, you can't tell it to get off the table. And that'll take you right back to your childhood, won't it? Right, those are the phrases that you heard all the time. I can stop drinking whenever I want. I don't want to talk about it. Right, it's mom's sick again and can't get out of bed. Let's not talk about it. It's dad can't keep a job. Let's not talk about it. It's I wouldn't have put my hands on you if you didn't say that thing and make me mad. Don't talk about it. Mother made some pancakes for Billy, but the dragon ate them all. Mother made some more, but the dragon ate those too. Mother kept making pancakes until she ran out of batter. Billy only got one of them. But he said that it was all he really wanted anyway. Some of you have been there in your family. Right? That's the place where you are hurting, but you still say, hey, it's okay. I'm okay. We're all okay. Billy went upstairs to brush his teeth. Mother started cleaning the table. The dragon, who was quite as big as Mother by this time, made himself comfortable on the hall rug and went to sleep. By the time Billy came back downstairs, the dragon had grown so much he filled the hall. Billy had to go around by way of the living room to get where his mother was. I didn't know dragons grew so fast, said Billy. There's no such thing as a dragon, said Mother firmly. Cleaning the downstairs took Mother all morning, what with the dragon in the way, and having to climb in and out of the windows to get from room to room. When you begin to admit that there is a dragon, it means you have to start dealing with it. By noon, the dragon filled the house. Its head hung out the front door, its tail hung out the back door, and there wasn't room in the house that didn't have some part of the dragon in it. And when we choose not to deal with our dragons, it will bleed into every aspect of our life. When the dragon awoke from his nap, he was hungry. A bakery truck went by. The smell of fresh bread was more than the dragon could resist. The dragon ran down the street after the bakery truck. The house went along, of course, like the shell on a snail. The mailman was just coming up the path with some mail for the Bixbys when their house rushed past him and headed down the street. He chased the Bixby's house for a few blocks, but he couldn't catch it. When Mr. Bixby came home from lunch, the first thing he noticed was that the house was gone. Luckily, one of the neighbors was able to tell him which way it went. We don't deal with our dragons. Other people notice. Mr. Bixby got in his car and went looking for the house. He studied all the houses as he drove along. Finally, he saw one that looked familiar. Billy and Miss Bixby were waving from an upstairs window. Mr. Bixby climbed over the dragon's head onto the porch roof and through the upstairs window. How did this happen, Mr. Bixby asked. It was the dragon, said Billy. There's no such thing, Mother started to say. There is a dragon, Billy insisted. A very big dragon. And Billy patted the dragon on the head. The dragon wagged its tail happily, then even faster than it had grown, the dragon started getting smaller. Soon it was the size of a kitten again. I don't mind dragons this size, said Mother. Why did it have to grow so big? I'm not sure, said Billy, but I think it just wanted to be noticed. Here's the deal. Over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be on a journey about being real. And as we do that, we are going to face some dragons. But before you face the dragons that are outside of your life in this world, you have to face the ones that are in your home. You have to deal with the parent wounds. You have to work through the family baggage. You have to be real about the sin and the pain and the brokenness and the toxicity. And you have to be honest about the impact that that's having in your life. Right? And this is why we need Jesus, because there is a dragon out there. Right? We need Jesus to give us strength to slay it. We need Jesus because we need the grace to pick ourselves up when we fall. We need Jesus to give us the truth to know how to keep fighting. And some of you are in this place because you have tried to fight this on your own for a very long time and you can't fix it. And so my hope in this series is that this is when you give up. Not give up on life, but give up on trying to fight this on your own and finally trust Jesus enough to give you the hope and healing and restoration that you need. Right, in just a moment, we're going to celebrate another baptism. And it's people who are saying, I know that I cannot do this on my own and I need Jesus. It doesn't mean things will be perfect. It just means I have what I need to fight through these things. And if that is you and you are in this place, we encourage you to check the baptism box in your connection card. You don't have to do this alone. But if you are a follower of Jesus, right, you trust him, your hope is in him, my challenge to you during this series is to understand, to fully experience the hope that he has for us and the peace that he has for us and the healing that he has for us and the community that he has for us is when we choose to be real. When we choose to be honest about the pains that we are going through and how that is impacting our life, and it starts with our family. Let's pray. God, we are so thankful that we can sit in a room like this today and understand that we are surrounded by people who understand what it's like to have family pain. God, that we know that it's true for every single person, even people who had the best parents and the best family life experience, there is still baggage. There are still wounds. But God, one of the things that we understand is that we live in this culture where we just don't talk about it. God, where it's not okay to bleed in front of other people. And God, that's been carried into the church. And God, that's not what we want. God, that's not why you created the church. So God, I pray as we go through this series, God, that we have enough courage to be real, to be honest, to be vulnerable, to bleed, to talk about the things that we are going through and to trust you to heal those things and to give us the people to surround us as we do it. God, there are dragons in our homes right now, and we've done a really good job ignoring them, but we know they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, God, we pray that you give us the strength and you give us the grace and you give us the truth to start fighting. And God, we're thankful that we don't have to do this alone. And God, we love you and pray these things in your name. Amen.